Hi, I read 14 books in the month of July. Starting off, the first book I read was This Is Not Miami by Fernanda Melchor. I read her book Paradise and I absolutely loved it. This is quite different. This is a series of nonfiction essays, like journalistic pieces that she's written over the years about crimes that have happened in her hometown of Veracruz, Mexico. Largely, this is about the drug cartels that have overrun the city, but it's also about government corruption. And there's murders and refugees and ghosts and possession. The possession story, which was her retelling of a story that her boyfriend had experienced, or I think it was her maybe first husband had experienced, was absolutely gripping and definitely the best piece in this work. This can often, especially that story, it reads like fiction because it's very imaginative prose. She also really positions herself in relation to each story, which I really appreciated. And I also loved how much the author's anger comes through in all of the stories. Like, she's mad about what's going on in this place that she loves. This isn't as good as her fiction work. I think her style of writing is really suited to fiction. This just wasn't everything that I wanted it to be. I think the summary sets it up to be really good because it says something along the lines of, this book makes you empathize with people who you can so easily write off as monsters. And I didn't find that that was really a thread in this book at all. And that was really what I was looking forward to when I picked this up. This is, like all collections, a mix of some really good ones and then some less good ones. But I did enjoy this overall, and it's very short. After that, I read A Little Luck by Claudia Piñeiro. This is a novel about a woman who leaves her family and runs away as far as she can after a horrific incident drives her out of her community. It's about guilt and motherhood and social ostracism. Oh no, I cannot. Being socially ostracized. That's what I'm going to go with. It starts as a sort of log that she's writing as she's returning to her hometown, but it morphs into more of a letter or a confession. There's this repetition in the beginning that gives you these new details every couple of chapters. It repeats the same thing, but adds in a little bit more, and it left me like on my knees begging for more. It just gives you these little crumbs very slowly, and then all of a sudden it shoves the whole cake down your throat. It's incredible. I loved the way it was done. And it's done so well that you never really get bored of the repetition that's happening. You're just so excited for more and more and more. This really made me think about mothers versus fathers who abandon their families and how they're viewed socially. There's not a word for deadbeat mom really, but that's accepted for fathers. I mean, it's not like it's great to be a deadbeat dad, but it's very different than how women are treated when they have been perceived to abandon their families. And it really made me think about how women's needs always come last, particularly how mothers' needs always come last. And I kind of had to examine my biases because I think I started the book thinking that she had made this really selfish choice to run away from her family, but in the end I thought that she had made the right choice and that actually she kind of got what she deserved, which was a happier life than she could have had if she had stayed with her family. It was a great read. It was super thought-provoking and I really didn't want to put it down. I thought the pacing was fantastic and I'm super excited to read more from Claudia Piñeiro. I know that her book Elena Knows is very highly regarded and I have it on hold at the library and I'm very pumped to pick that up. Next, I read Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. This is about a woman who is crossing the border from Mexico into the US to deliver a letter to her brother. It's a young woman who's living in and learning how to survive in multiple worlds of violence. This book has some large overarching metaphor about the journey into the underworld that I did not grasp at all. I think a lot of this book went over my head. I just didn't really get it. And I think that was mainly due to my issues with the way the translator dealt with translating this. I did not like the choices that the translator made in this. It uses this very strange language with made up words, and that the translator's note says is faithful to the original, and I believe that, but I just didn't like the way it was done. Almost every page uses the word versed. It uses it in a way where it's not a word. It uses it to mean like moved, and it did say that that was something that the original had. I just hated the way it was done in this. It was so frustrating because I didn't want to read the translator's note because I thought it would spoil it, and it did spoil it. So the whole time I was like, is this a word I don't know about? I was asking everybody around me, like, what does versed mean? It was crazy, and it was crazy how often it was used. There's also this emotional distance that's created between you and the character because of the really detached writing style, which sometimes was interesting because every once in a while it showed her humanity in a way that made me really have to reconstruct my idea of who the character was. And I did like that, but for most of it, I just didn't really care about what was happening to her. And like, she gets shot and then like nothing happens. Like, it doesn't feel like you're reading about a person except for a very few instances. And those few instances are kind of interesting and cool, but you have to suffer through a lot to get to them. I think the unconventional writing really did ruin this for me. It didn't feel like it was unconventional in a way that was saying anything or doing anything new. It just made it frustrating and weird. And I do like unconventional writing, just not the way this was done. I think that this was probably really fantastic in its original language, but I don't know if that atypical use of language really is able to be translated well, and it certainly wasn't in this case. I think part of my feelings about this book are also just very much about me. I was camping at the time I read this, and so I wasn't really able to devote my full attention to it, and I wasn't really reading to understand. I was more reading just to read and to have something to do. I didn't have like noise canceling headphones on, just like sitting on my couch reading it like I typically read books, so that might have really contributed to how I felt about this, but overall I just didn't really enjoy this book. The next one is The Dangers of Smoking in Bed. This is a dark and creepy collection of psychological horror short stories about women in contemporary Argentina. This includes stories of a woman with a fetish for people on the brink of death. There's stories of like a rotting ghost baby haunting a woman. There's cannibalism. There's this group of teenage girls that are fatally jealous, and it's told from the we perspective, like third person plural, which is my favorite thing ever, especially when it comes to a group of teenage girls. I love that. I loved Brutes so much, and this story definitely had the vibes of that. It's grotesque and it's blunt, and it's really not afraid to be disgusting, but at the same time it deals really sensitively with people who are experiencing pain and suffering and mental illness. A lot of times the women in these stories are dealing with paranoia and fear. There's this large thread of paranoia through the whole thing that makes it really, really tense to read, and often these feelings are coming up because of the violent society that they live in, and because of violence that has been inflicted upon them at the personal level and also at like the larger structural level. I was expecting it to be a 5-star book because I had heard so many good things about it, and I love short story collections, and I never hear anybody talk about short story collections, so I really thought this was going to be perfect for me because I had heard it was dark and it was creepy, and that's what I like in a collection. And it didn't really get quite there for me, and I can't totally put my finger on why that is. I think a lot of the stories felt like they were leading up to nothing, and then they did lead up to nothing. Like the story would just end and you're kind of like, what's the message, or like what's the point? And I don't always need a point, but these stories often felt like they needed a point and they just didn't have them. What also brought it down for me was like the random use of transphobic slurs, like for no reason. It was just like using these crazy words that really didn't tell you anything about the characters or the story or the setting. It was just like there to be there, and I thought that was like a really off-putting choice that definitely left a bad taste in my mouth, and I would just warn you to be aware of that. It is a good collection, but like, why? Why? After that, I read Sula by Toni Morrison. This is the second Toni Morrison book I've ever read, and I did like Beloved a little bit better, but Sula was fantastic as well. This is about the evolution of a friendship between two young black women in Ohio. It takes place over like 40 years in the early to mid 1900s. It's this beautiful and very alive portrait of friendship and betrayal and small town community politics. And Toni Morrison is so witty and so sharp. Her dialogue is so tight and fantastically done. It's the best dialogue I've ever read from anyone. And she has this sense of humor and whimsy that is phenomenal in everything I've read from her. She has this way of folding the remarkable into the ordinary, like talking about things that are so incredibly like extraordinary and weird and magical, but as if they're very normal. So you're like, wait, did that actually just happen, or was that like some hyperbole? Like, it's hard to tell, but in a way that is so engaging and fascinating. The characters have such unique and strange worldviews, and they're so complex and fleshed out and vivid. And she does this thing where she demonstrates one of the characters' experience of grief by switching the perspectives around in this absolutely gut-wrenching way that was so masterful. I didn't necessarily feel as connected to each and every thread in the book, so sometimes the pacing was a little bit off for me, but that's truly my only complaint, and it's not even really a complaint. It's just like the reason I've come up with why I liked Beloved a little bit more than this one, but this was super good and I totally recommend it. After that, I read The Factory by Hiroko Oyamada. This is kind of a satire and slightly surreal novel about an exaggerated workplace in Japan, this factory that takes up like many city blocks and becomes the entire life of everybody working at it. The book follows 3 employees of this factory, and it conveys this sense of meaninglessness and feeling like your work is so futile and you're like this cog in a machine and the cog doesn't even really matter that much. As the connections between the characters unfolded, that really took precedence over the plot, which kind of fell to the side. I really liked, though, it switches perspectives each chapter between the characters, and it does this really interesting thing where you don't know who's talking until they say what their job is. Like, you're not entirely certain whose perspective you're reading until they talk about what they do, because they each do different things, which really makes you think of them as their job and not through their humanity. Like, the world that they're living in is doing this to them, and also you as the reader are doing this to them as well. It's like at every level they are reduced to their work, and it's done super well. I had heard that this was like Severance, and I didn't really think it was all that much like Severance, but it was super quick and interesting to read. Nothing to write home about, but pretty good regardless. After that, I read Life Ceremony by Sayaka Murata. This marks my completion of the Sayaka Murata universe that has been translated into English. I've now read all 3 of her books that have been translated, and I liked them all. I think I liked this the least, and I liked Earthlings the most, for sure. Though this is still great. This is a collection of short stories that have all of the themes that are present in her other work about capitalism and conformist society and the expectations of women. I think that Murata takes norms that are so easy to uncritically accept as just the way things are and really exaggerates them and flips them on their head. And she makes you think about what you think is normal and why you think that, and it's like so interrogative. More than anything, it really questions how women in particular are expected to live and behave. I loved about this that a lot of the stories had some threads of the plot that was present in Earthlings, which made me feel like she had been writing these short stories, but all along Earthlings was the story that she had really wanted to tell, and I loved that in here. This was translated by the same woman that translated her other 2 works into English, and I think through all of them, I thought the translation was just okay. I think that Japanese is really hard to translate into English, but it leaves you with some like very simplistic language, and there's definitely not beautiful prose in here. This is really about the ideas that it explores. And it explores those ideas wonderfully, and I think she does a great job with the themes that she works with every single time. After that, I read We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This is like a gothic domestic horror. I think it's a classic at this point, about 2 young women who are living in their family's estate after the rest of their family have died. The plot is really about the tensions that happen when a cousin comes to visit them and disrupts the very organized routine life that they've been living for the past couple of years and really throws things into disarray. The narrator is a young woman. She's very childlike, and she has these really intense compulsions to carry out these rituals and almost spells that she thinks will keep her and her sister safe from the outside. And her cousin absolutely fucks with that, and it gives this really strong sense of injustice that occurs actually on many levels of the story. There's this really frustrating aspect about the narrator's older sister, which is that she is kind of the homemaker, and she is expected to do so much in the home with absolutely no thanks, and it's just kind of this relentless task that she's always taking care of everyone, and no one is ever giving her anything in return. I wanted her to explode. Like, I just wanted her to blow up. I wanted her to start throwing plates around, like screaming at everybody. It was so frustrating to read her side of the story, especially from the narrator's perspective, who is really the one asking her to do most of the things she does. But overall, this really is an examination of the relationship between the 2 sisters and their undying devotion and loyalty to each other, because they really only have each other. And that is a fascinating exploration. I didn't love this book, though. I thought it was super fucking wordy, and it's only like, I think it's less than 200 pages, and it's quite small, but there was so many words in it, which made it kind of just drag on and on and on. The pacing was not great, and the writing, while beautiful, just didn't really captivate me. After that, I read Get in Trouble by Kelly Link. This is kind of a funky little short story collection that almost borders on being fantasy, which is certainly not my cup of tea. The best story in here is about a teenage girl who falls in love with her rich best friend's robot boyfriend, but other than that, I didn't really like many of these. I was expecting to love these because the author's picture at the back of the book shows this like absolutely crazy tattoo that she has that I love so much, and for some reason set me up with these really high hopes for the book that were not met. I know that's not a reasonable complaint, and it's not really a complaint. I'm just saying, like, I really thought I was gonna like these because she has this crazy tattoo, and I didn't like them that much. I thought they were really smug, to be honest, which maybe I could have expected from the tattoo. The stories were super long, like upwards of 40 pages often, which is not what I'm looking for in a short story collection. And it also meant that they didn't follow the typical conventions of a short story, where you try to give as much information as possible as soon as possible so that people can grasp what's going on. It did not do that. I would often go 20 or 30 pages into a story not knowing what the fuck was happening until it was finally explained to me, and it never felt satisfying. It just felt annoying. I think the premises would have been pretty engaging if they had been made clear from the start, but it also, like I said, was a little bit too fantasy for me. I didn't like this overall, really. It was not a great collection for my tastes, and I just think the structure was not good. I want to know what's happening in the story. It was so annoying. Up next was A Girl is a Half-Formed Thing by Eimear McBride. This follows the life of a woman whose childhood is really defined by her brother's brain tumor, and also by the sexual abuse she experiences and her mother's devout religious beliefs. I've been dreading talking about this because I don't really know how you would even begin to start talking about it, because it is so strange and unconventional, so I can't really compare it to anything else I've ever read and rate it in that way. I have no idea how to describe the writing style. It's told in the most disconnected, disjointed prose I've ever read in my life. I think it's supposed to be like a stream of consciousness thing, and it was really difficult to get into and read. I don't have the book here, but I'm going to find a preview of it online and read you some of it, because I feel like that's the only way to describe what this is like. As I was reading this, I was giving it to everybody, being like, tell me what you think of this writing. I'm just going to read from the start. For you, you'll give her name. In the stitches of her skin, she'll wear your say. Mammy me? Yes, you. Bounce the bed, I'd say. I'd say that's what you did. Then you lay down, they cut you round, wait and hour and day. The entire thing. It often was just pure gibberish, which was so annoying. I, again, was not reading this at the right time. I read this while we were camping at a music festival, so there was lots of things going on around me, and it took me 5 minutes to read each page because of the writing style, but also because of where I was. But it was exhausting. It took such a tremendous amount of effort to read. It's so demanding. You have to intuit so much about the author's intentions, and even just about what is simply going on in the book. Sometimes could be interesting and satisfying, but more often than not, it was just frustrating. And besides that, the whole book, even if it was written normally, it borders on being straight up misery porn, which is just fucking boring. It's okay, bad things are happening to her. Great. We don't even get to know how she feels about it because the writing style is so strange. I don't think that this was bad, but I also think that people who recommend it are recommending it simply to be pretentious. And when I was at the end of this book, close to the end of this book, I was so excited for it to be over. I was thrilled to read something that was written in a more conventional style, because it was exhausting and so demanding. The next book I read, We Want What We Want by Alix Ohlin, another collection of short stories, was not good at all. And the only reason I got through it was because I was so thrilled to be reading something that was not written so absurdly. This is the typical literary short story collection about relationships between people and love and desire. It's just not done well at all. To get me interested in a collection like that has no dark parts really, or no magical realism aspects, it has to be written really well, and this was not written well at all. Stories in here include a woman with a dead parent who goes to visit her friend who's isolated herself in the woods because of a mysterious and questionable illness, a woman with a dead parent moving from Sweden to the US to live with her cousin after, I don't know, something happens in her life, and another woman with a dead parent who goes to rescue her cousin from a cult he's joined in upstate New York. It's all dead parents. It's literally all dead parents, and it's so tired. The stories were not interesting or novel, and the writing was absurdly clunky. It felt really unedited, and it also felt like I would often read a sentence, and it would be very clear to me what the obviously better way to phrase that sentence was, and it just was phrased in the worst, most clunky way that you've ever seen. There is a part in here where it says, tears wobbled in the corners of her ears. You're telling me no one caught that? Was this not edited? Are short story collections edited differently than typical novels? Maybe that is true, because I feel like I often have complaints about short story collections, especially lit fic ones, feeling really unedited. This is probably the worst offender, because there were so many mistakes. It was crazy. In the end, I felt like I had to drag myself through it. I never felt compelled to pick it up, and it just wasn't good writing at any point, really. It's not awful. I just have nothing nice to say about it. I do have nice things to say about Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin, which is the next book that I read. This is the first Baldwin book that I've read, and it certainly won't be the last. This is about an American man living in Paris who's discovering his sexuality. While his girlfriend is away in Spain thinking about their relationship and whether or not she wants to marry him, he falls in love with a man and they end up moving in together and having a intense, short-lived relationship. This is a really sharp observation of the more specific setting of Paris in the 1950s, but at the same time of very universal human experiences that could have been written from the perspective of someone in any time and any place in human history, basically. It explores sexuality, identity, morality, and it's really about the main character, David, figuring out how to be in relationship with other people without holding a part of himself back. He makes really selfish choices because he knows things are going to end poorly, and then they do end poorly. They end exactly how he thinks they're going to, but he makes the choices anyway because he wants a little bit of like love and connection. And so he just hurts people over and over again. I really liked the contrast between the main character, David, and the man he falls in love with, Giovanni. Giovanni was very open, where David was super closed off, and Giovanni was very connected to the people around him, and David was incredibly detached. The dialogue in here was fantastic, and often it could be quite funny, and I felt like the evocativeness of the prose really put you into the character's head. Every once in a while, this could lean a little bit dull, but overall, this definitely lives up to the hype surrounding it, and I thought it was fantastic. Okay, we're gonna talk about Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I fucking hated this book so much. If you don't know, Crime and Punishment is about this man who kills two people and then falls into insane, delirious paranoia and fear throughout the rest of the book. It's really about morality, and it theorizes a lot about the nature of crime. All of the characters have very different worldviews and ideologies that it really, really gets into, sometimes in a way that was overly academic. The characters in here were very vivid and vibrant and like so dramatic and intense. And I loved that. There were so many of them, though. And sometimes it would just say names that would never come up again, and you never really knew whether or not you needed to be paying attention. Each time it introduced a new person, because there were so many people. I ended up keeping a list at the back of all of the names that I thought were important, and that really got me through it. There being a lot of people in this book is not my main complaint with it. My main complaint with it is that the pacing is fucking awful. Absolutely nothing happens for 70 pages, and then a whole bunch of stuff happens for 60 pages. And then nothing happens for 150 pages, and then a whole bunch of stuff happens, and it just keeps going up and down like that. It is so hard to get through. It was honestly torture. I struggled to get through Crime and Punishment, and I really do hate being the guy who's like, Crime and Punishment didn't work for me, because everyone rates this a 5 stars. You go on Goodreads and it's like majority 5-star reviews. And that's like typical of most classics, because I think nobody wants to admit that the book that everybody else liked was not their favorite book. I'll admit it. I think I'm really brave for saying this. Fuck Crime and Punishment. I don't think it's a bad book. Like, I genuinely don't. I spent 3 days reading this. All I did was read this. It ruined my life. It was just so hard. It was so hard to read. I'm trying right now to make a conscious effort to read more classic lit, because I have not read much at all in my life, and I'm about to start an English major. This reminded me why I don't like to read classic lit. It was so hard. I hated this so much. I hated my experience of reading this. And it also makes me feel like I never want to read any more classic Russian literature, which rules out like a lot of it. And a lot of books that are known as the greats are Russian from the 1800s. But this has turned me off of them. I'm sorry. The next book I read this month was also my favorite book of the month, and that is Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. This is about a woman named Rachel who has an eating disorder and a very complicated relationship with her mom, which, often come hand in hand. And she falls in love with a fat woman named Miriam, who is from an Orthodox Jewish family. This is about restriction and freedom and her relationship with her body, not just how it looks, but also how it behaves and what it needs. The characters are so realistic and complex and well-rounded. I loved the way that it contrasted Rachel against Miriam, because Rachel is so restrictive and Miriam is so free, and Rachel has really intense relationships with things that Miriam is so neutral about, like her own body. Broder's writing style is so fucking funny and casual and easy to read. I love that in both books I've read from her, she has very short chapters. Love a book with short chapters. I couldn't put this down, but I also so badly wanted to because I wanted to savor every moment of this. I was like, actually, like, while reading it, I was kicking my feet. I was so excited to read this. The stakes feel so high, even though, like, they maybe aren't necessarily, but it's like thrilling. It almost makes it a page turner. Melissa Broder makes getting a new flavor of frozen yogurt to be this really exciting and kind of dreadful experience. I loved the very gay women dynamics of like, are we just friends, or like, is this something more? Like, are you gay? Am I? We're holding hands, but that's just a thing friends do. But like, I'm in love with you. Are you in love with me? Fantastic. Perfect. So relatable. Everything this said and explored, it did perfectly, and it was such a great insight into the mind of someone with an eating disorder without you feeling like the intention of the author was ever to be fat phobic, which I think is like a hard line to balance on. And I'm devastated that I only have one more release to read by Melissa Broder, and I'm excited to read it, but I might save it for like a long time so that I'm not done with her books anymore. I think she is one of my favorite contemporary authors. I adore her, and I loved this. This is, I think, a bit better than Death Valley. It was so good. It does help that this came after I had just read Crime and Punishment and I wanted to kill myself. It's so much not Crime and Punishment, which was exactly what I wanted. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.